From the American Academy of Neurology, I'm Dr. Daniel Correa. This is the Brain and Life Podcast. This week is the second of two episodes in a series where we are touching on a condition called SynGAP1. It's a condition with mutations in that gene that cause symptoms of a rare epilepsy and also of autistic features and cognitive delay. These two episodes run together, and it's best to check out our first episode and then follow through with the discussion with our medical expert and these family stories to today. We are continuing these stories with Vicky Arteaga, and we'll be back with Dr. Aledo-Serrano in the second part of our episode to learn more about the science behind SynGAP1 and other rare epilepsies. Next week, we'll be back to our regular programming. We'll bring you more stories from our community living with other neurologic disorders and updates on the latest science and treatments with interviews with key medical experts. Welcome back to the Brain and Life Podcast. So we're continuing a special series of discussions with families impacted by a condition called SynGAP1. Today, I'm joined with Vicky Arteaga. She's the mother of three daughters, Violeta, Amelia, and Lourdes. Amelia is now 7 years old and was diagnosed in 2018 at age 3 with this condition. From the moment of receiving her daughter's diagnosis, her and her family have felt it was important also to reach out to the Latino and Hispanic communities in order to promote awareness and support and seek for a cure for this condition. Her and her family live on the Florida Space Coast, but her effort to reach and support this illness goes worldwide throughout the Latino diaspora. Thank you so much, Victoria, for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such an honor.
So, I wanted to start out and learn about how your pregnancy with Amelia was as a young mother with Violeta and growing your family with Juan.
Well, we had a very normal pregnancy. It was a very happy pregnancy. My oldest daughter, Violeta, she was 2 years and a half when I got pregnant. So it was a very active pregnancy, very healthy. It was wonderful. We had so much hope about this second child.
And you started your family with Juan in Colombia, or you were already in Florida?
We were already in Florida. We were living here for about 10 years. And that's when we decided to have kids. Yes.
And how was her delivery and her first days with you and her family?
Yes, well, it was a normal delivery, but she had her cord on her neck. She didn't need oxygen according to the hospital. She was delivering Jupiter. And so that was one of the first things that the doctors later on, that I will talk about it, thought that it could be a cause of her delays.
Okay. And had you known any other children who had cords around their neck or cord entrapment during their birth?
I did. I met a few families before, so I was a little concerned. She had low tone muscles. She was a little bit different than my first one. So that were some signs there that were our concerns, but our pediatrician always said that she was doing fine.
So generally you were reassured at the start of things, but you mentioned some things you two noticed. What were the first things you and Juan noticed?
Now that we think about it, probably we could have asked more questions. But yes, she kind of didn't sleep as much as Violeta did. She took some time to roll, to put her head stead on. She also, sometimes she had like a little trembles, like she would jump when she was sleeping, and those type of things. You might think they could be some abnormalities or probably seizures, but we didn't think it was anything to be concerned of.
And what were your first worries when you started to notice some differences with her to Violeta?
She wasn't as active as Violeta was. She always had her hands in her face. She kind of developed a little bit later. So it was kind of hard. She wouldn't stand by herself to sit by herself. So those were the first times when I was telling her around 6 months, like, she's delayed. And this was my second child. And that's why I kind of was more aware of the things that they were not happening. I think when the parents don't, is their first child, probably it takes them more time to get therapy. So early age, we moved back to Colombia because of work related. So we moved back around 9 months, 7 months. I started going to a pediatrician, pointed out my concerns. We started doing early therapy, physical therapy, those type of things. And when we started our odyssey of the diagnosis in Colombia, and we started going to every single specialist in Medellin because I knew something wasn't right. Around her first year, she started crawling. So she only seated by at 9 months old, and she started crawling at her first year.
At that point, she was already developing some language, or was she also having a delay?
Just a few words. She started having delays as well. It's just a few words like agua, mom, dad. And then when seizures started at 18 months old, but it took some time. Probably it started before, but we didn't think it was because if SynGAP 1 is more when they are eating, and is myoclonic eyelids. So she will close her eyes. We thought she was falling asleep. So we always thought, oh, she's falling asleep. She's falling asleep. So we never thought it was something. We started going to a neurologist, and then we started doing the same, the EEG, but it was a short EEG. Everything was normal. MRI was normal. All the basic genetic testing, they were all normal.
At that stage, when still all the tests were normal and you didn't even necessarily know whether or not she was having seizures, did you have a sense or know other family members or people who had had kids with childhood developmental delay or any other conditions that cause delay?
Not really. We just met the people at therapy. Sometimes I know the therapies are very nice, but sometimes they could be over empathetic, is how I call them. So they will tell you, no, she's okay. She's delayed, but she will catch up. So they will be very hopeful. And sometimes I feel like probably we just need to dig up a little bit more. And even the neurologists, like they didn't have the answer at the time. We visit several neurologists, but the first one said like it probably is it was caused because of the lack of oxygen when she was born. So that was the first kind of like the conclusion that he had, because they couldn't find anything else. I kept asking the questions. I kept going to different specialists. I remember some of my family would say like, she's okay. Why are you kind of like keep saying that she's sick, but she's not? And I knew in my gut that something wasn't right.
That's a challenging perspective and interesting point that you say. In some ways, sometimes the level of empathetic reassurance that we can have for parents who are really going to be dealing with a long-term medical condition and something like this might actually, take away from, the support that they need. It sounds like you're suggesting when there really is uncertainty and we don't know, that sharing that honestly may help, parents in your situation.
I agree 100%. It's good to be empathetic, but don't be over empathetic, because that gives you a false hope to those parents that they still don't have an answer.
What tests ended up giving you more information to help you understand what was going on with Amelia?
This is very interesting because at the time, imagine 4 years ago, there were not many exomes, even in the US. And we kept asking, we want a third child. I kept asking, like, what if we want a third child? And what else do we need? That was kind of like the genetist was suggesting. They kept doing more tests. And they said, well, the last resource that we have, but we don't think we need it. Amelia is delayed, but she's not as severe. They said their last resource was having an exome trio for the three of us, but it wasn't being done in Colombia at the time. So it had to be sent to Spain and then come back to Colombia for the results. And it wasn't covered by the insurance. We said, whatever the cost is, we want to have these results. So we did that. It took us 45 days to get a result. We moved back to Florida because at the time she was almost 3 years old. Seizures were starting to get worse. We knew we were having some challenges finding the right school for her, the IEP with the special needs requirements that we needed. I talked to my husband. We were planning to stay one more year in Colombia. We said, no, this is important for Amelia. We have to go back to see if we can find more answers in the US. So we decided to come back, and 40 days later, we got the result of SynGAP 1. And I remember crying all night when I was reading in English some of the few resources that I could find in English about SynGAP 1. And it was just heartbreaking because the information was very overwhelming. She was only 3 years old. I couldn't believe they were talking about intellectual disability. They were talking about behaviors. They were talking about schizophrenia. And there were tons of information there that I couldn't even process. And even though I spoke some English, it was just hard to understand the level of also scientific language that they were there. So that's part of the reasons why we decided to be involved also with the Hispanic community, just to change that process to the Hispanic families diagnosed with SynGAP 1, that we could have more available information.
You mentioned early on that she was maybe doing some of the eye movements, but you weren't aware of, and the initial tests and EEGs were normal. When did it become clear that she was having seizures, and how did you know?
Yes, it became around 2.5 year old when the things got worse, especially when they start having drop seizures. Because initially they were more like fever related. She had a virus. She always had a lot of issues with breathing, and some because of her low tone muscle too. She will have constantly colds and infections and different viruses. So it was very hard at the beginning. She had her adenoids removed, and she was a little bit better after that.
So she would have these drop seizures, or I think what many people would call atonic seizures. So her body would just lose her tone, or lose her muscle tension that helps her sit up or stand up, and she'd fall.
She will fall. She will just be walking or climbing the stairs up, and she will just fall down. So it was very scary at the time.
Did she have to use a helmet?
Yes, she did. She did. When we moved back to Florida, that's when we got, finally, we started finding new treatment. That's the importance of having organizations. So they knew more about SynGAP, so they could give you some information about what is the best treatment. We started with one medication. It wasn't working. Then the neurologist was open enough for my suggestions. So it's when you inform parent and you kind of like, SynGAP is better with this medication, so we can try this first. And then he was like, okay, I agree. It wasn't my first choice, but let's try that. So we started there, and now she was a little bit resistant to medication, but now she has 3 medications and she's controlled.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up the importance of organizations, whether they're academic organizations, government organizations, or community organizations, and research funding organizations like the SRF, to help improve the information that's out there. I mean, what you encountered, it seemed like from one moment, you had to try to take in and process a lifetime of a potentially progressive disease, and what that meant for you and your family, and with very limited information. It's great that the SRF has, really put an effort forward, not to just improving the resources and information for families in both English, but now also working towards the Latino and Spanish-speaking community.
That's right. That's right. I think knowledge is power, and the importance of saying and telling the parents that they need to be empowered and they need to learn and they need to be educated about what their kids' disease is the only way that they can improve a little bit better. Because sometimes it's hard when there are such a few patients around the world. Now we're talking about around 1,200 patients around the world. The neurologists don't know what SynGAP is. They don't know how to even write it. Like, they need to know how to write it down and how to put it in the system, because they don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, these are challenges that are not necessarily unique to SynGAP 1 and encountered by individuals and families with many different medical conditions. And that's why I think, learning from families like yours and the SRF has really pushed forward so quickly in advancement, not only in the studies and treatment, but also in resources, is a great resource for all of us. So at this point, what were the next steps that you took with doctors? You said you came armed with information and empowered by the SRF, and that helped you move forward. What were you think were the most important next steps that you took with the doctors, with you and Juan, to help take care of Amelia?
It took us 1 year, I think, to process the grief. So it took us some time to understand why us, to change to why for. And then we got pregnant with our third child. So we got invited to be part of being board member of SynGAP Research Fund. I really thought it, probably that was not a good idea, because I was pregnant at the time. What I was going to do now with 3 children, I'm in Florida with not too many family around that good care support. But that was the best decision we did. We said yes, and we jumped on board, and we started, to find all the patients in Latin America, the few of them that they were there, finding other families in the US that spoke their language. Even families from Spain joined later on. And that was really magical, I would call it, because it's the power of community and the power of families, that we are together. We know what we are facing, all the challenges that in the daily phase that we have, the feelings, the sometimes the guilt, sometimes the fear, doing that. And then we start having some resources in Spanish and having the scientific SynGAP Congress. So we had all the researchers, that we had doctors that spoke Spanish. We had that first also, that we are going to have our second round this year. So doing that, it gives us more resources in Spanish. It gives more information to the families. They have that sense of belonging in a place that they are welcome, and they understand all the challenges that we face in a daily basis.
It sounds like in reality, while you were away from Colombia, that you, together with the SRF and the Latino community, you guys really grew a new family.
That's right. And when we travel, we try to meet. Like if I go to Colombia, we had the Colombian family meet up. If I was in Spain last year, we try to meet with the people, the families in Madrid and in Barcelona. So it's so important to meet the families. I know how they are, and the kids, and it's just more family to us. Yes.
And you mentioned, so Amelia's on a few different medications. What are other treatments and symptom management that you guys have focused on that has helped her?
Therapies like OT, PTSD, we have horse therapy, we have swimming, we have ABA, behavioral analysis therapy, home. So we have tons of activities for her in order to improve as much as we can, because I know it's very slow. She goes to a classroom with 6 kids. She has her shadow in her school. It was very important to talk about safetyness at school setting and all those type of things that you need to make sure that everything is on place.
So tell us about Amelia now and how she is with her sisters and at school.
Well, she's a happy person. She's very silly sometimes. She loves jokes, even though she's nonverbal. She speaks around 80 words of English, which is funny because we only speak at home in Spanish, but it seems easier for her. So the little one that is 3 years old, she speaks to her sister in English because she thinks it's easier for her to understand. But they are very close. They love each other very much.
And you mentioned horse therapy. Is that something that just Amelia has been participating in? Does she do it with you or her sisters or any of her family?
No, she does it by herself in a program, special needs program, and she does it every other week, and she loves it. It's a 30 minutes ride with her horse, and she can just clean the horse. It's very unique, her relationship with the horses and with the animals in general.
think animals and pets are important to many of us, and even more so, I think, to kids. For you and Juan and your family, we're talking about a lot of things, a lot of therapies. This is a lot of time costs and financial costs. I imagine that's a lot for your own family, but many people can't do all of these things. I don't know. Do you have some thoughts about that?
I do have a lot of thoughts about it. One of the things is like, how could you balance your life with your other siblings? That has been my biggest challenge as a mom of three. So just making sure that everybody is going to get the attention they need to, but also to understand that there is one that needs a little bit more. Having a therapist, a psychologist, or whatever help is important to also see things from a different perspective and different and professional way too, to help you through this, not only with your child that needs more attention, but the other ones need as much attention as they too. So to make sure that they also have memorable time and joyful time, and even though with the limitations of having one kid with special needs, making sure that everybody is enjoying whatever activity we are doing that we can do together, because it's not always possible, right? So how we can make it possible, and if we like outdoors, and if we like going to the mountains, or we like to go into the beach, things that probably is a lot more manageable than going to a restaurant, for instance, or going to a fair, or going to very loud places. But also how can like make sure my other ones have the other activities like tennis and tennis lessons, gymnastic, other things are. But I also tell the families that you have to balance it out, because sometimes we focus so much on therapy, that probably we are just compromising other things. So it's just finding the right balance that is going to work for your family financially, but also in every way.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot to balance, and also some extent of accepting that you can't do it all, but being present.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Vicky, for sharing everything that you've learned together with Amelia and Juan and your family, and for all that you're doing to advocate for the community with SynGAP and for our Latino and Hispanic community to have more resources and learn more about this condition and their health.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And also, that's why we decided to co-found the Sociedad Hispana de Enfermedades Raras Share, that is going to be live soon. And the idea is to help organizations to improve their connections and the information, their resources in the language to the Hispanic communities.
Now stay tuned for more information about SynGAP1, the SRF, and epileptic encephalopathies as we continue our discussion with our medical expert. Can't get enough of the Brain and Life podcast? Keep the conversation going on social media when you follow @Neurodoctor Correa and @Brain and Life Mag, or visit brainandlife.org. Wow, Vicky and Amelia's experience navigating the path to find not only Amelia's diagnosis with SynGAP1, and then working towards management and treatment, and just the love that they share in their family. It's truly inspirational. Now, I want to get back to our discussion with Dr. Ángel Aledo-Serrano from Vitas Madrid Neuroscience Institute in Spain. He is a specialist and neurologist and researcher advancing our knowledge of epilepsies and developmental encephalopathies, and has been working with SRF to help bring forward new treatment and new science. We're going to continue the discussion that we started last week with him, and hopefully really help us all better understand what's going on with this condition. Now, Marta and her daughter Sofia, and also Victoria and her daughter Amelia, are from Colombia, and they now live in the United States. What do we know about the impact of the SynGAP1 diagnosis and condition worldwide?
What we know about these genetic conditions is that they have the same frequency worldwide. So in Latin America, this diagnostic gap is much larger. And I have some patients following them by telemedicine from for example, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, or Peru. Sometimes because they don't have the knowledge or they don't have the experience with these conditions, they cannot ask for genetic testing, so they don't have the experience managing seizures or behavioral problems or this kind of situations. We are working on that. I'm trying to help them to spread the word and to gain literacy about neurodevelopmental conditions in Latin America.
Now, the SRF has also been really pushing and helping move forward research. So, how are they helping support research for this condition?
They have a scientific committee. Other colleagues are part of it, and they are supporting them, deciding new projects to support and also giving new ideas. Also, they are doing a lot of disseminating strategies, social media, with Instagram, with Twitter, with the web page, with podcasts, and that's really, really important. And I know some of my colleagues here in Spain, which were not very used to neurodevelopmental conditions like SynGAP1, and they are starting to hear about SynGAP1 because of them. So they are doing something very, very valuable.
That's incredibly important. So there comes to the challenging question. Is there a treatment for SynGAP1?
That's a problem. What we have is only symptomatic, but it's also important. We have medications for seizures. We have also medications for behavioral problems, which are not very, very effective, saying everything. We have also medications for sleep or for constipation. So for problems which are causing suffering in these families. But we don't have specific pharmacologic treatments. We have non-pharmacologic treatments, which are also very, very important. So physical therapy, logotherapy, occupational therapy. So a bunch of therapies which are maybe the most important for these families. And we are now in an, I would say, exciting situation where for the first time in history, we have new treatments which are targeting the specific cause, so the genetic underlying condition in development. But we are in a good path in that regard.
One of the therapies mentioned by several of the families is applied behavioral analysis, or ABA therapy. Tell us about the importance of that in supporting these individuals and their families.
What we know about SynGAP1 is that behavioral problems is the main drive of quality of life for the parents, for the community around, for the patient. So behavioral problems sometimes are related to speech problems, so they cannot communicate. So then they struggle handling the emotional situations or their frustrations or the limits between the parent and the caregiver and the patient. So these kind of therapies are helping on this. So it's great that we are improving therapies for behavioral problems, for communication, and that's helping for the quality of life.
And a lot of families also get involved in other supportive therapies, hippotherapy or therapy with horses, aquatherapy, music therapy. How do you work in those into helping support the individuals living with this condition?
They are helping very much. Sometimes we are so focused, we put ourselves the costume of superheroes and we are working and we want every day, every schedule to work with the child and with the adult affected person. We are sometimes forgetting that they have to have fun. And sometimes having fun and having emotional links with the animal, for example, in the therapy with horses, the hippotherapy, or working with dogs, or the aqua or music therapy, this having fun, this emotional distress managing is helping. They have better routines, they have better sleep, they have better behavioral managing. So this is really important in our routine clinical practice.
And, this raises the importance of the families and the care partners and supporting each individual. And as you said, describe them often in a way, truly superheroes. What can we do, either as clinicians or even as just neighbors to help support these families?
So I think the most important is to have time for them. So the clinician family link is so important, so important. Sometimes we are so focused on the drug decision that we are forgetting to have time with them. Sometimes we learn a lot from them, from their experiences. For example, we performed a research study 1 year ago. It was qualitative approach. In a qualitative methodology, you do interviews with the families with developmental epileptic encephalopathies. They were talking about their experiences, about the diagnosis, the symptom management, the relationship with the healthcare system. And what they told us was that only the conversation was a therapy in some way. So I think to have time to understand, and in this, I don't know how it's in the US, but in general in Europe, consultations are getting shorter and shorter.
Mm-hmm.
So this fast food medicine where you have to go so fast with very, very complex problems is really, really, really bad for neurogenetic conditions because you have to go deeper and have difficult conversations sometimes about behavioral problems, about shame, about isolation, about social functioning, how the couples can handle the problem in the child and still have a romantic relationship between them. I think that's the most useful. Of course, then spread the word, go in social media, talk about it, work on the stigma. So, of course, we have a lot of things we can do for our patients and for our neighbors in the community.
It's good to know that we can at least just even give them the gift of our time and our listening. Now, you and many of the other researchers working with the SRF are doing research into future and possible treatments. What types of treatments are being studied and maybe how far away are they?
This timing is so frustrating in general for clinicians because we want to have the best treatment strategies as soon as possible for our patients and families, but of course for them, especially for them. So the development pathway is very slow in general, but I would say that we are in a really, really good situation. I would say because of two factors. First of them is that SynGAP1 has a really strong community, really strong patient advocacy groups. So then when a drug company wants to decide where to invest money, they prefer diseases with organized communities. And second, SynGAP1 is relatively common. So as we were saying before, is one of the most common among the rare diseases. So there are many companies in the last few years with interest in SynGAP1, and they are using different strategies for treating the disease. We know in SynGAP1 that the problem is what we call haploinsufficiency. This is that we have a copy of the gene which is okay, and we have a copy of the gene which is mutated and is not working enough. So what we can do is to put a good copy of the gene, that's gene therapy directly, but also what we can do is to use antisense oligonucleotides. That's a treatment which is trying to produce more of the good copy of SynGAP1. That's another strategy which Stoke Pharmaceuticals and other companies are working on. So, yeah, I hope in the next few years, maybe in the next year, they are saying, but I like to put the expectations in a proper level because otherwise it's very, very frustrating. We will have clinical trials, hopefully next year or in 2 or 3 years.
It sounds amazing that, we can work with dysfunctional genes in that way. It really brings the sense that we are closer to that level of science.
Yeah, the future is here. Yeah.
We know that beyond just getting the diagnosis and starting off, therapy with families. It's a lifetime with these individuals and for these families. So are there important considerations for the families of individuals living with SynGAP1 as they progress through adolescence and become adults?
That's a big question now because, as I said, I see children and adults. And when you perform a diagnosis in a child of SynGAP1 or any other neurogenetic condition, one of the first questions of the parents is, what will the future of my child look like? And we have a big uncertainty on that because what we call the adult phenotype, so the manifestations of the disease in the adults, are poorly understood so far. In this moment, we are studying the SynGAP1 adult phenotype with the group of Daniel Andrade from Toronto. I think that data will be very useful. What we know in general is that seizures are not so important in adults. Of course, there are cases with refractory epilepsy in adults, but in general, it's less important. And it's more important the behavioral problems. And also, we know that there are some motor problems. So because of that, we should still work on motor physical therapy, also behavioral neuropsychological therapy. It's important to get genetic testing in adults because all our consultations of epilepsy or intellectual disability or motor dysfunctions are full of SynGAP1 and other genetic conditions.
It's a lifetime of love and support and enjoyment with families, but also much caregiver support and care and therapy that's needed throughout their life. Angel, we truly appreciate you sharing your time, experience, support, and hope for the future of medicine with our listeners and the community living with SynGAP1 and all the other pediatric and adult neurologic disorders you help take care of.
Thank you so much for the time and the opportunity to talk about this topic, which is really, really important, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you again for joining us today on the Brain and Life podcast. Follow and subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes. You can also sign up to receive the Brain and Life magazine for free at brainandlife.org and even get the Espanol version. For each episode, you can find out how to connect with our team and our guests, along with great resources in our show notes. We love it when we hear your ideas or questions. You can send these in by email to blpodcast@brainandlife.org and leave us a message at 612-928-6206. You can also follow the Brain and Life magazine and me on any of your preferred social media channels. These episodes would not be possible without the Brain and Life podcast team, including Nicole Lucier, our Public Engagement Program Manager, Rachel Coleman, our Public Engagement Coordinator, and Twin City Sound, our audio editing partner. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Correa, connecting with you from New York City and online at Dr. Correa. Most importantly, thanks to our community members that trust us with their health and everyone living with neurologic conditions. We hope together we can take steps to better brain health and each thrive with our own abilities every day. Before you start the next episode, we would appreciate it if you could give us 5 stars and leave a review. This helps others find the Brain and Life podcast. See you next week.